Arriving on console as a full release, just over a year after launching into early access on PC, Endzone: A World Apart is a survival game with city building, supply chain, and decision-making elements, all set in a nuclear post-apocalypse. For console players, you get the Survival Edition, which simply bundles in the first DLC, called Prosperity. Developed by Gently Mad Studios and published by Assemble Entertainment, it's a complex, engrossing, sandbox-style experience, but also a great fit for consoles, thanks to how the core mechanics work, some smart UI design, and the gamepad mapping. Now, aside from the flashy opening cinematic that sets up the premise, there's little in the way of narrative drive in Endzone: A World Apart. In short, a terrorist incident crippled nuclear power plants around the world in 2021, spewing radioactive clouds into the atmosphere, allowing for only a select few to make it into underground shelters known as Endzones. Over 150 years later, a new generation of survivors emerges from these underground bunkers, having never seen the sun or experienced the old world. What they do have is a century worth of research and planning, and the drive to re-establish society on the surface, no matter the cost. Now, I must admit I spent very little time with the default highly customizable survival mode, a mode that allows you to tailor hazard intensity, map geography, resource availability, and more, before trying to last for as long as possible. As someone who grew up playing impression games, city builders, think Caesar 3 or Pharaoh, I've always enjoyed a campaign map, with some narrative flavor, the steady rollout of new technology, and increasingly complex objectives. That's not to say the survival mode is devoid of any emergent moments, but commanding expeditions, or dealing with citizen side quests, are ultimately just time-sensitive mechanical tasks that boost or penalize your settler confidence levels. Instead, I first tackled the multi-hour tutorial, which features a fully voiced mentor that'll guide you through just about every mechanic in the game, and even drop the odd reference to past events, before I moved on to the objective-driven scenarios. These named missions, 8 in total in the Survival Edition, have a brief introduction that lays out the premise, 3 increasingly tough objectives, and distinct map parameters, think layout, hazards, and resource availability. For each objective you complete, you unlock a medal, complete all 3, and you actually complete the mission. Now there's the Distant Places DLC, unfortunately not yet available on console, that expands upon this idea, with story-driven excursions into new biomes, and this is definitely something you should keep an eye on if you enjoy the base game, but you're looking for some more narrative flavor. Regardless of which game mode you pick, the basic gameplay loop remains similar. Accumulate resources, grow your settlement, research new technologies, launch expeditions into old ruins, and survive the ever-present threat of radiation. You'll be juggling a ton of resources, some basic, many refined, but you'll typically have breathing room to solve any crisis just so long as you accumulate stockpiles of clean water and food for your settlers. Of course, that's easier said than done in a hostile world filled with radioactive soil, damaging sandstorms, raiding parties of surviving humans, and seasonal cycles of drought and contaminated rainfall. As a result, Endzone: A World Apart forces you to establish multiple sources of food and clean water, and ensure that one of the frequent environmental hazards doesn't cripple your entire colony in one fell swoop. In most game modes, the risk of radioactive contamination escalates over time, and this swiftly becomes the biggest issue you'll need to contend with. Not only direct exposure, but the knock-on effects should your food or water production chains become contaminated. Thankfully, Endzone: A World Apart is a game with a solution for every problem. With dozens of structures, some with multiple functions, you can establish diverse supply chains for food and water, protect your settlement from radiation, drought, and raiders by carefully planning the layout, automate settler behaviors during crises, and quickly reassign your limited workforce based on your immediate needs. You're also not thrown into the deep end, as there's a nice flow to the early game, which gives you time to assess your surroundings, locate available resources, and start planning. For basic structures, wood and scrap will do fine, but you'll eventually need to refine scrap into cloth, metal, plastic, and electronics for your more advanced structures, before you need to create materials like concrete, glass, and reinforced metal for more sophisticated ones. Of course, getting that far along means still accounting for many secondary considerations, like generating coal for filters, harvesting natural plants for medicines, harnessing solar and wind energy, issuing decrees to control your settlers' behavior, and leading expeditions. You've got 6 technology trees to work through, one of which is included with the DLC, that unlock new structures like a weather station for predicting radioactive dust storms and contaminated rain, a solar collector and wind turbines for power, and an expedition hub to scout and scavenge old ruins. You need to prepare, equip, and then dictate actions during these expeditions, with the chance of success based on the qualifications of your team and the assigned gear. There is always the risk of death and contamination, but it's worthwhile as the rewards include caches of basic resources, seeds for your farm or orchards, and instant technology upgrades. Many of the advanced structures you can unlock through research offer toggles to control settler behavior during crises, such as ordering your water gatherers and farmers to cover up their operations during contaminated rainstorms and use stockpiled clean water instead. When you throw in the granular radiation and soil moisture model that shifts with each passing season, and the ability to select even a single settler and examine 24 parameters that define their productivity and confidence, Endzone: A World Apart is an incredibly dense and busy experience that can consume hours in a single run. Yet, despite all the complexity and the myriad of things that can go wrong, it's not a game about panicked micromanaging, if you plan and play cautiously. If you maintain the coverage of your decontamination units or defensive towers, expand basic resource production in line with your new manufacturing structures, and always ensure you're producing an excess of food and clean water to stockpile, you can weather most disasters. It's a design that also makes it such a good fit for consoles. Consoles have a long history of city builder and real-time strategy ports, with varying degrees of success, given the difficulties of translating traditional mouse and keyboard control schemes onto a gamepad. The good news is Endzone: A World Apart is a great fit, with only minor niggles. The UI, although dense, has been well tailored for a gamepad, and makes use of radial menus and interconnected tabs for quickly swapping between structures of the same type. Icons are easy to interpret, menu navigation is responsive, and there's a quick menu for each building, with the most frequently used functions or toggles. For fastidious players, and those looking to tackle tougher scenarios, there are bumper and D-pad shortcuts to quickly activate and deactivate overlays. Manufacturing buildings have shortcuts straight to the upstream processes, and you can always shift your game speed down to 0 if you need a breather. The only time I struggled with the gamepad was when trying to select an individual settler or small objects like power lines and decorative features. Visually, Endzone: A World Apart looks good, albeit not pushing current-gen flourishes, and there's a limit on the fine-scale detail that's not unexpected in the genre. There are some nice atmospheric effects, incidental details for structures and settlers, an immersive, nature-flavoured ambience, decent, albeit limited voice work, and an eclectic electronic soundtrack that really gets you into the zone. Ramping up the game speed and watching the environment shift from lush to barren as a sandstorm sweeps over was always impressive, and the frame rate felt consistent throughout, irrespective of how big my settlement grew. No element of the presentation is going to blow you away, but it feels appropriate for the post-apocalyptic setting in which nature is slowly reclaiming the land. If I have one gripe, it's that too many basic structures have a ramshackle appearance and look too similar, making dense settlements increasingly tough to navigate if you're trying to identify, upgrade, or dismantle these older buildings to refocus on new industries. Ultimately, Endzone: A World Apart Survival Edition is a mechanically complex, engaging, and time-consuming city builder survival game, with great gamepad support, and it's a game that'll appeal to console gamers who've played and enjoyed titles like Aven Colony or Frostpunk, those that combine survival elements and town planning. If you're someone who prefers mechanical depth to narrative context, are willing to commit hours to expanding a fledgling settlement, and have the patience to always plan several steps ahead, Endzone: A World Apart is a solid choice on console.